All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us at lunchtime today, or breakfast if you're on the west of us here in London. So, I've got another one joining. So, wanted just to welcome you to the initial SGK open mic lunch. So, thank you for joining us. Oh, everyone's piling in now. So thank you for joining us. We have two fantastic speakers for us today who are willing to kindly share their insights on a couple of key subjects. We have, if you just bear with me, people are still diving in here. So we have Robin Albin, who is I'm sorry, there's another one coming in. Is the founder of her own agency, Insurgents. She's an innovation expert. She used to be the SVP of Conceptual Innovation at Estee Lauder. But before Robin speaking to us, we have Damien, who is the director of J2 Reliance, a machine learning company and consultancy. And he will be sharing some insights around the demystifying of AI recommendation systems. So, Damien, I will turn it over to you and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you for the intro. And thank you for having me here as well. Let me share my screen now, and you let me know if that works. Can you see? Yep. Can you see the slides in full screen?
All set. And just before you run in there, please, anyone, if you have any questions, we have the chat function, or feel free just to unmute yourselves and jump in and fire away. This is to be an interactive session, so please feel free to do that as you see fit.
Thank you. So thanks a lot, everyone, for coming. So as Simon said, I'm the director of a machine learning consultancy, which means that essentially there are two things that we try to do. So we help many different types of businesses leverage machine learning techniques to make their processes more efficient. And also, the second thing is we help them deliver more personalized services to their customers, especially retail brands, obviously. So today, I want to talk about this second thing, obviously, and try to demystify the AI or the machine learning that is behind recommender systems. So what I mean by that is that at the end of the presentation, I think it would be great if you all have a bit of an intuition of how those systems work, how those systems analyze purchase behaviors to make recommendations, and also maybe a bit of a taste of what it is to develop a system like that in-house, and how it is different from developing other sorts of digital capabilities like web apps and websites. So let me jump in. Okay, so I'll first introduce what recommender systems are and what value they bring to a business. We'll then move on to the short technical introduction I mentioned, so that we try to understand how they work and why they work. And then in the third part, we'll go through a few lessons, or actually one main lesson that we've learned from developing those systems at scale. And that's so that's kind of the part where you may wonder what developing such a system in-house may look like, and what are some of the hurdles that you need to anticipate, essentially. So I'm not going to go through the fourth part. It's kind of a presentation of the company, but if I share the slides later, you can go through it to see how we operate and how we help companies actually build those systems and other types of machine learning systems. Okay, so essentially, when we talk about recommender systems here, we talk about personalized systems. So we're not interested in recommendations of the type, these are the best sellers in a given region or in a given category, and we are presenting those to the customers, but we are really looking at recommendations where you understand what might be of interest for a very specific customer who is browsing your website, or just going into your store and interacting with your products. So these personalized systems are everywhere. So you find them in online stores. They're used to put personalized products forward. And this makes the experience you may have on an online store's website or app a lot smoother, because you spend less time looking for the products you're interested in. And yes, so everything, because your experience is personalized, it makes everything simpler. It's also used in loyalty programs. So, for example, to send targeted offers to customers because you think that this is a product that they may not be buying yet, but if you give them a bit of a nudge, they may be interested in that product. They're used in streaming websites, obviously, like Netflix, in music apps as well, like Spotify. And also one thing I wanted to say is that these recommender systems are not only used in a business context or in a retail context, but they can also be used in many different fields like healthcare. For example, when you're trying to predict what drug may be more adapted to a given patient you're looking at. So I think the main impact of those systems is to reduce the overload of information and offers that a given customer may be exposed to when they're browsing websites. So for example, so the first way to do that is obviously to have a good search engine. So for example, if you've got an online marketplace, the first way through which a customer is filtering products is this mean. But even with a good search engine, it could be that for a given request, you get like hundreds of different products. And you need to know how to reorder those products in a relevant manner so that a given customer have the things they're interested in first. So that makes the life of your customers easier, and also it shows your customers that you know them. So these are a few numbers that are widely cited. They are from a McKinsey survey from a few years ago. I'm not going to go through them, but essentially what this says is that these recommender systems are very central to a few organizations like Amazon, YouTube, and Netflix. And that's essentially, those recommender systems are one of the many reasons, but a very important reason for which these companies are so successful as providing the services they provide. Okay, so let's move on in the technical introduction now. First thing I would like to say is that there are essentially three types of recommender systems. The first type is the so-called content-based recommender system. So essentially what a content-based system does is it recommends products to your customers that are similar to what they usually buy. So for example, if you bought some sport gear on Amazon, it's very likely that in the next couple of weeks, you're going to get recommendations for other sport gears, just because they share a common, these products share a common tag, which is sport, right? So it's nothing very, very smart, but it's already a first level of recommendation. The second type of system is called collaborative filtering. And this is where most of the machine learning or the AI comes into play. Essentially, what you're doing with this sort of systems is you recommend products that are purchased by people who are like the customer in question. So we'll see how that works. And so yeah, we'll see how that works in the next few slides. The third type just combines the third type just combines the first two types, essentially, and it's called hybrid systems. So I think, so what I would like you to understand at the end of the talk or the discussion is really how collaborative filtering systems work, because I think they are maybe the most interesting from a machine learning or AI point of view, and they're also the most powerful by far. But before doing that, I think it's good to start with the basics and see how a content-based algorithm works, because this may help have an intuition of how collaborative filtering systems may work. So essentially, you've got two customers here. The one on the left is a fan of sports and outdoor activities. The one on the right is more into other things like traveling or food or cultural things. I'm not sure. So you've got a racket here, which you want to send to a specific customer. So the question you're asking is, what customer can I target with this item? And quite obviously, because I'm not sure if you can see the mouse on the screen.
Yes, you can, Damien.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, they share this attribute. So this customer and this item share this sport attribute, and therefore that's what you're going to use to make the recommendation. So it could be that these preferences are, given by the customers when they fill in a form or similar, or when they register their preferences. But it could also be that you learn the preferences of your customers based on their past purchases. So for example, like I was saying with the Amazon example before, maybe the gray customer here has bought a couple of sports stuff in the past, and that's how you inferred that they were interested in sports, essentially. And the other customer has bought some kitchen tools and other food-related products, and that's how you understood that they were interested in food. So essentially, this kind of system work when you've got a fairly rich product attribute database. But one advantage of this is that you still need little data to make them work. You don't need to analyze thousands or millions and millions of transactions to get something like that working. But a major drawback is that you need to define your product attributes a priori. And that's very arbitrary. So for example, here we define sport as an attribute, but the question is, how granular is this? And is this really the right level of granularity? Because there's nothing actually that tells you that someone who likes rugby would like racket sports or something like that. So at some point you need a cutoff, you need to define those attributes, and that's very arbitrary. That's absolutely not data-driven. So let's see how to do something like that in a more data-driven manner. So essentially, if you're asking the same question as before, you want to know whether you should recommend the racket to the gray customer here or not. So you're trying to answer this question again, but what you do this time is you look at the purchase behavior of this gray customer in the context of the purchase behaviors of all other customers. So this matrix tells you for all the customers in your shop and all the items in your shop, what they've bought in green here, and what they rejected somehow with a red cross here. So for example, you sent a recommendation for them, or you sent a rebate for them or something, and they refused it. So if you look at this matrix, it's fairly obvious that the gray customer has purchase behaviors that are very similar to the red and green here, and therefore the inference that you will make for their interest in the racket will be that this gray customer has the same interest as the green and red, and therefore they would be interested in the racket. So one advantage of this technique is that it's obviously a lot more data-driven. So let's try to, so now in the next few slides, I'll be asking the question of how exactly you can analyze these purchase behaviors to make recommendations, not just by looking at the metrics like that, but in a more systematic manner. And those are the few slides where hopefully you'll get a first intuition of why that may work, essentially. So if you've got customer attributes and product attributes represented in a vector like that, it's fairly easy to understand why you could build a function here that compares those two vectors and make a recommendation based on that. So if these two vectors are very similar, you'll say that this customer item is a good match. And if they are very dissimilar, you'll say that probably the customer would not be interested in such an item, right? So now what we're trying to do with collaborative filtering is the same thing, but without knowing in advance any of these vectors here, okay? So it's not only that we don't measure the features that are attributed to the product and the customer, but it's even that we don't even want to define those features. We don't even want to define what we want to measure, what attributes we want to measure for these two guys here, because we want the data itself to define what features are interesting, what features are predictive of what is a good customer item match. And for this, so like we've seen before, we want to use this customer item interaction matrix to infer not only the rating here, but to infer those vectors so that we can generalize the approach later on for other items. So what's done is, so essentially you use machine learning to do that. You initialize those two vectors with random numbers in it, and these are now learnable attributes. It's not attributes yet that you define in advance, it's attributes that you're going to learn from your data. How do you do that? Essentially, you take all your customers, you take all your items, and you try to reproduce the customer item interactions that you've already observed before. So here we've put some random numbers in there, and we see in gray everything where every interaction for which we were wrong. So if you remember the matrix from before, so if you take this, for example, green customer doesn't like the dish here, but what we predict here is that it does. So what we need to do is use machine learning to adapt those attributes, those product and customer attributes, so that first we can reproduce those numbers, and then use those learned attributes to make new predictions. How do we do this? Essentially, it's done in a very systematic manner where you compare your predicted interactions with the truth, which you know, compute a distance, some sort of distance between them, use some sort of optimization routine in order to update those attributes in a very systematic manner. And at the end of the day, what you obtain is learned customer attributes and learned item attributes, which you will use to make your predictions, just like you were doing with the content-based filtering. So that's essentially, I'm going to skip this slide. That's essentially the intuition behind collaborative filtering. So whenever you hear about systems analyzing your behaviors in order to make recommendations, essentially what these systems do is they define product attributes and customer attributes that best represent their true behaviors, instead of doing some a priori arbitrary definition of, for example, an item that is for sport or for cooking, and a customer who likes sport and cooking. So I hope this was clear enough. So I'll take questions, or should I take questions now if there are any questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Feel free, anyone to jump on. That was excellent, Damien. I did have one. So how far, for instance, can we take this? I understand the collaborative kind of the way that it's indexing, the products and associations on the fly, and creating those relationships. But from a business standpoint, can we then start to add in additional criteria? So maybe weighing new products and services maybe that we're adding into the business that we want to promote over others and test those, or maybe there's certain product lines that are more profitable than others, so it's beneficial to.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, absolutely. So it's definitely something you can do. So you wouldn't do it. So the thing is that what I showed here is really the algorithm, right? It's really the machine learning that powers the prediction. But then this algorithm will be integrated in a greater product. And within this greater product, this greater pipeline, you may add any sort of business rules that you think are interesting. So for example, if you want to promote some products, what you would do, so let's say, so for example, that you want to so if you take one category of products, like sport balls or something like that, and let's say that there is one specific brand that you want to promote this week, because as a retailer you've got a contract with the brand to advertise their products for 1 week or something like that. Then the first thing you can do is run these recommended systems to find all the customers that are most likely to like the brand, or what you can do is run the recommended system to find all the customers that are more likely to like to be interested in balls, and then within those customers or for those customers, you decide to push the one product you're interested in, which is the specific brand you're promoting. So it's multiple stages of filtering, essentially. Does it answer your question?
Very much so, Damien. Very much so. That's fantastic. So let me, as time's ticking on, we'll regroup around at the end of this and do the additional Q&As here. But Damien, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. That's really opened.
So I did keep the last section for the interest of time, but maybe I can share the slides later, and people can listen and come back to me with questions, if any.
That'd be perfect. Yeah, most definitely. So thank you, Damien. If you can just turn off the screen share there. And then next up for everyone, we have Robin. And as I introduced you before, Robin's going to start talking to us about how we can utilize, which is a nice follow-on, storytelling from an innovation standpoint.
I want to say hi to some of my friends out there, Elizabeth and Linda. Great to see you up so early in the morning. And I understand Meryl just lost her ability to join us. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So as Simon said, my name is Robin Albin, and I have a branding and innovation agency called Insurgence. And basically, I'll just give you a very quick rundown of what we do. Is we basically create stories for brands. Many of them are startups, so they're just beginning to figure out how to position themselves, how to talk about themselves in the world, how to communicate their messaging and build their identity, which helps them evolve and develop a strategy. And just some of the brands that I've worked on over many, many years of doing this are here listed on the screen. So what's very interesting about the segue from what Damien talked about to what I'm about to talk to you about is that storytelling is really the essence of figuring out these customer attributes and then not only analyzing them, but being able to elaborate on them, to be able to say a little, to understand through developing a character profile, how this consumer might in fact behave, and how we can begin to understand ways to guide their behavior. So getting underneath that, I'm going to put myself off screen here for a second, just so I'm not distracted. So I'm going to begin by telling you a story. And it begins here. So once upon a time, there was an Australian triathlete, and her name was Katie Kelly. And she had set her sights on competing in elite international triathlons for many, many years. She had prepared for these kind of events since she was 6 years old, and her entire life revolved around sport. She was always looking for the next challenge. She had competed in the New York City Marathon and the Ironman. And like most triathlons, it was the event that she was preparing for was a 750 meter swim, followed by a 20-kilometer bike ride, and culminating in a 5K race. Now, the exciting thing is that Katie, after this tremendous preparation, competed and won the International Triathlon Union event, finishing more than 8 minutes ahead of the other silver medalists. And that catapulted her to the top 5 in the world. Now, this is an amazing achievement for any athlete, but more so for Katie, because you see, Katie is blind. And she was diagnosed at the age of 22 of having this disease called Usher syndrome. And it's an extremely rare degenerative disease. So she started off as fully having all of her senses. But over time, these symptoms include hearing loss, which leads to deafness, loss of vision, which leads to blindness, and she winds up with a condition called deaf blindness. Those who experience this also have tremendous balance and speech impediments. And shockingly, there are over 100,000 children that are born with this disease. And to date, there's no cure. So obviously being told that you have this lifelong incurable eyesight problem is a terrifying prospect. It leads to loss of freedom, isolation, loneliness, safety issues, and depression. But for Katie, those were not an option. She could not quit. This setback merely spurred her on. And she decided to compete as one of the first vision impaired athletes in the 2016 Paralympic Games in Rio, and she won the Olympic gold. So frequently we think about storytelling as a tactic that we use to educate and explain and connect and communicate the benefits of a product or service. And it's a means of communicating ideas that are to make them more understandable and acceptable to a specific audience. It's a way to inspire and engage decision makers during a pitch or a presentation. And I'm sure many of us have used this technique to help engage the audience. But one of the things that I want to explore with you today is the ability for storytelling itself to inspire innovation and to help guide all of your marketing decisions. And I think Damien touched a little bit on it when he was talking about the ability of analytics to predict consumer behavior. And as I said at the outset, one of the things that I believe storytelling can do is once you have these analytics to be able to enhance and evolve your ability to predict and to guide consumer behavior. And whether you are a marketer or in operations or you're in innovations, these techniques can really help every aspect of your business. So what's the purpose of a story? The purpose of the story is, from the first sentence to last, is to confirm a truth that deepens our understanding of who we are as human beings. It invites us to experience similarities between ourselves and others, so that we, I frequently call it the nod factor. If I tell you a story and you recognize any aspect of yourself in it, you begin to nod, you begin to say, you're talking to me. So it's a terrific way of bringing your audience into the process, as I already said. So the quintessential thing about a story is the number one commandment is make me care, either intellectually, emotionally, and aesthetically. Once we know Katie's story, we want to help her on her journey. We want to understand a little bit more about what her experience is, what her challenge is, and therefore we can begin to envision solutions that can help her overcome those things. Go on to the next. So, and that involves empathy. Empathy is the ability to be aware of, understand, and be sensitive to another person's feelings without ever having to have the same experience. And I think we're hearing a lot about the necessity of empathy now with everything that's going on in the world, whether it's, here in the States, the fires, the loss of homes, and the loss of jobs, the pandemic, and all of the issues that we're currently facing. It's the idea of someone saying, you get me, putting yourself in someone's shoes and seeing things through his or her eyes so that you can understand their thoughts, their emotions, their motivations, and then begin to help, as I said, solve them. And I love this quote. This is a famous quote. If you want to know how the lion hunts, don't go to the zoo. So the way that you really begin to relate to people is to observe them and not, sit and reading statistics without kind of really getting under the skin. Empathy is best achieved, as I said, through observation. And one great example that I love is Frog Design was working on a new remote for one of their clients. And what they did was they studied how blind people use remotes. Because just think about how many times you're watching TV in the dark. And you want to be able to just have that instinctive knowing where your fingers go on the keys. Another great example of that was when we switched from rotary phones to touch tone phones. The designers of this was a habit. You dialed a phone, you went in a circular motion. How do you get people to switch their behavior? So one of the things the designers did is they studied how people use their hands. They studied gestures so that they could begin to help people change their behavior. We hear frequently, and I've been in a ton of meetings where senior management or marketing people say, you cannot change people's behavior. But just think about all the things that we've done over the past bunch of years that have changed our behaviors. It wasn't that long ago that we were introduced to an iPhone, and therefore, that whole sense of touch. So when you're looking at these nagging issues, you're not necessarily looking for the big things. You're looking for the little techniques that you can begin to help people around these tension points, things that people do out of habit. And if you watch these things, if you observe people often and frequently enough and in enough detail, you'll begin to recognize these patterns of behavior. You want to come at these things again. We do this with an alien mindset. This is the ability to put away everything that you believe and everything that you've learned. I was on a seminar webinar yesterday where they were talking about unlearning and how critical unlearning is. That's the ability to see things through alien eyes. And there are 4 traps that we all fall into again and again and again that prevent us from truly observing and learning about people so that we can develop this incredible sense of empathy. The first is called educated incapacity. And what that is that's the curse of knowledge. We are experts. We know so much about what we already know that we fail to see what else is going on in our world. And this is a very dangerous thing. It's the danger of expertise, being so smart about everything that we know. The second thing is our default systems. It's the tendency that we all have to operate on autopilot. How many times have you walked out of the house and said, did I shut the oven? Did I turn off the TV? These are automatic things that we do and we don't even think about them. Did I brush my teeth this morning? So when we get into these automatic pilot scenarios, we become so used to responding to things in a certain manner that we're unaware of what we're doing. I'm challenging you to put this default system away and recognize the little things that you do every single day, because those wind up being inspirations. Where are you using a workaround that you can possibly solve a simple problem? An example of this is think about how challenged you are sometimes to change the batteries in your mouse. Now that's a little problem that you have, which is north, which is south, which is positive, which is negative. Just by beginning again to not doing this on automatic pilot, but recognizing that you're struggling with this, even as insignificant as it might seem. So that's the second fault that we have to overcome in order to be more creative and more tuned into our audiences. The third is a great sin that happens in marketing all the time. And this is this sunken cost fallacy. The idea that I have already invested so much time and so much money that I cannot pivot. It's just really, really hard to get away with it. I'm just going to stay the course because I've already invested in this. And this keeps us from changing our point of view on things. It prevents us from understanding and recognizing where we might be missing something. And finally and lastly is this whole idea of the innovator's bias, or you could say it's the marketer's bias. And that's falling in love with the solution before we ask enough questions. And part of storytelling is to keep asking questions so that you develop a deeper and deeper perspective. So how do you create great stories? I'm going to share with you 3 different techniques, and they actually all kind of evolve from one another. And they just help you create a consumer profile. And again, it's a little something that Damien touched on before, but it just, again, starts to enhance that story. So this is probably the most familiar. It's called the Pixar story spine. And I think you've seen this over and over again. I basically started off when I told you Katie's story. Once upon a time, there was fill in the blank, and every day such and such happened. One day, something changed the course of that. And because of that, until finally. And one of the great storytellers that use this is Nike. If you've ever watched a Nike commercial, every single Nike commercial follows this format. Once upon a time, there was an athlete, and every day he got up and he ran 5 miles, and in rain and cold and whatever. And then one day he tripped and fell and twisted his ankle. And because of that, he lost confidence in his ability to succeed, until finally he got up and he got the courage to move on. So this is a very familiar, it starts with a reality, you have a change conflict, you have a struggle, you have a climax, and then the conflict is resolved until you create a new reality. So this is a great way, and again, you could take any of Damien's characters and then begin to put them into this storyline and begin to imagine solutions based upon the conflict that's created, the struggle that's created. And it's actually a variation on what Aristotle had created. Aristotle added the point of the plot, the characters, the conflict, and he added to this the dialogue. What are the characters saying? How are they saying it? Are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they happy? What are they not saying? And these, by imagining again these aspects of a story, you can begin to suss out things, solutions and connections that you could make within the story. And as a perfect example, to create this sense of dialogue and get into the head, thinking back to Katie. Now, Katie was determined. She was going to go on no matter what. But what if Katie was actually frustrated? What if Katie was defeated and she couldn't move on? How does that mood and emotion change the story? So you want to try and explore, and as I said, not fall in love with the first story that you come up with, but begin to say, if I change this or that, how does that change what the outcome might be? And it will give you lots of different ideas. The setting is another thing. What is the physical environment in which your characters are performing their acts? Are they on a clay tennis court? Are they on a cement tennis court? Is the sun out? Is it raining out? Just by beginning to think about what the different aspects of the environment are, again, you can begin to understand and create different outcomes and begin to have a richer sense of who that customer is and what they're going through. And change is fundamental in a story. Anytime a story goes static, it dies. And that's because life is never static. So what you want to do is you want to look for that conflict. You want to look for where that problem crops up. And that's very, very useful in changing both the character, the age, the demographic of the character. Are you talking to someone who's 18 years old, or are you talking to someone who is significantly older? And that, by changing that, also changes how the storyline exists. The third aspect, the third tool to put in your toolbox is this idea of jobs to be done. And this was created by the late, great Clayton Christensen. And he said that customers don't buy products or services, they hire them to do a job. And a job is shorthand for what an individual really, really seeks to make progress in a specific circumstance. So it aligns with this whole storytelling, because basically what you're doing is you're setting up a conflict again, and you're outlining who the character is and what setting they're in. And I'll give you, and again, innovation is not about progress, it's about a process. It's about people, not progress. And progress is about movement from one situation to another. And if for any of you that that have read Christensen's book, he gives the scenario of the milkshake. And he was hired by, I think it was McDonald's, to find out how to improve their milkshakes. And they had looked at everything under the sun. You know, do you want more flavors? Do you want a bigger container? Do you want the container to be recyclable? Do you want it to be sustainable? And what they did is they went and they observed throughout the day who was buying the milkshakes. And one of the couple of the things that they observed was that people were coming mostly in the morning buying milkshakes. They were doing it through the drive-through. They weren't coming into the restaurant. And then they were speeding off on their way. So one of the things that they were able to deduce from this story is that obviously these people were in their cars, they were driving to work, they were likely the conflict might be they were hitting traffic, and they needed something to keep themselves busy while they were driving. And if you had a donut, you know, you might wind up with crumbs all over your lap, and therefore you're going to be distracted from driving. If you had a bagel, the bagel would be eaten very, very quickly. So what they deduced from that is that if you make the straw thinner and you make the milkshake thicker, it's going to take more time and effort in order to consume that. So therefore you are going to be entertained during the course of your drive. So the positioning of the product, the way of thinking about the product, was not so much as a breakfast meal, but as a source of entertainment. And just by reframing the problem and reframing the solution, you come up with a variety of other scenarios. So again, it's all about making progress and overcoming obstacles that get in the way. And the best way to do this is through observation. And, you know, again, setting up these scenarios. Where are you? When is it? What else are you doing? What will you do next? Is there anyone else with you? What are they doing? By creating these storylines and imagining what is going on in the consumer's world, you can begin to create these fully fleshed out behaviors and alter the behaviors by helping them, your audience, overcome these obstacles. And the whole idea is that these innovation insights, and whether it's a marketing insight or a product development insight or anything that you're working on, it has to do with more with depth than with breadth. I think one of the things in this world that we are, with all the data that we have, is we look for lots more data points. We say we have all of these hundreds of data points, but really what you want to do is find a couple of those data points and drill down on them and just keep asking why, what, how does that affect? Because by doing that, you will create a greater understanding of who your audience is and what they need in order to solve their problems. So again, innovation has more to do with depth than with breadth. And so now let's go back to Katie and what we know about Katie. She is in fact one of 1 million blind athletes, both in the US and internationally. For the moment, in order for Katie to compete, including in the Paralympics, she relies on a sighted partner. In this case, it's a woman named Michaela Jones, who's a very famous triathlete. And she is tethered. I think you could see here the tether, and she follows Michaela during the course of the race. She's also on a tandem bike in order to do the bike. So that she cannot compete independently. And this is limited in terms of an athlete's performance and their ability to have independence in the event. So for the visually impaired, retaining this sense of independence in day-to-day life, let alone participating in sports is super challenging. It can be long and winding, and it could also become a very unsafe process, especially in new environments or at night. So again, I'm giving you these details. How do you start to solve around these details? Because obviously for Katie, and again, as it's not just for Katie, thinking about aging baby boomers that are more and more going to be affected by their eyesight impairments. There hasn't been a really terrific breakthrough that has enabled people with sight impairments to be totally independent. There are limited technologies, although they're starting to be improved. But because we know that Katie is competing, she obviously can't use an all-terrain cane. That's not going to work when you're running a marathon, or having a guide dog. That's simply not going to cut it. So Samsung is one of those people that recognized that there are these athletes out there and they want to compete. And one of the things that they invented was this thing called a blind cap. And so that when the swimmer is in the pool doing the laps, that as they get to the side of the pool, there are signals, there are sensors within this cap that begin to tell them where they are. They help them, they're like a GPS in a way, that help the swimmer know exactly where they are in the lane. So again, by understanding who the character is, what the situation there is, what the obstacle that they begin to overcome, we can begin to solve problems for people using our imagination. Here's another one. What about if rather than having an all-terrain cane, there was a visual sensor that you wore either around your neck or on your wrist that again gave you these GPS locations and were able to tell you, is there an obstacle in front of you? Is your path clear? Are you coming to a red light? And by clipping this product onto your clothing, it gives you a sense of location and ability to navigate. And actually someone is working on this right now. It's called Maptic, and it was developed by a Danish entrepreneur. And just imagine how that would begin to assist people in their limited scenarios. So again, understanding who the character is, what their objective is, what their goal is, what their obstacles are, what their setting is, you can begin to create these stories and these scenarios that can help you move your product or your innovation forward in unique ways. And this is just another example of how this Maptic is developed and where it's worn. And you see that it's got this sensor built into it. It's a very simple device. You could wear it as a necklace, you could wear it as a bracelet, you could clip it onto your clothes. So it's really going to change the world for people. So again, make your story about people, not products, not data points. Set the stage, describe the characters and the location. Include every little detail. That's really, really critical. Explain the struggle. Capture the emotion. Is this frustrating someone? Is it making them angry? Is it making them depressed? All of those things will begin to color how you might solve their problem, and focus on the conflicts and how they're resolved. And basically that will help you tell you what your story is. And above all, make me care. Make me care about the characters that you're creating and how you are going to help them overcome whatever the obstacles and the conflicts that they have. And so thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Robin, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, everyone feel free to chime in on the question standpoint. I do one initial thing that came to mind. You know, obviously, within the kind of, especially in the fashion and the beauty industries, for instance, with social channels and the different channels we come into, we start to run into influencers and stuff like that. And does the usage of like these third parties, these influencers, stop us from telling those stories or losing control of that narrative?
I think influencers basically take the power away from the brand and the storyteller, because it becomes much more of a superficial endorsement. And that's not making it, in my mind, making a connection with your ultimate audience. You're doing exactly what it is. You're influencing someone to choose one thing over another based upon someone's opinion, not based upon the lifestyle. And I think, you know, in the beauty business, and Linda and Elizabeth in our audience will have heard me say this multiple times. I think that in beauty and fashion, we've gotten very, very far away from that human touch that really began to create scenarios where we were thinking about who this customer was rather than just trying to sell them products based upon competitive features and benefits.
So, so you're thinking that we need to start to pull, especially in those two industries, to pull that back and refocus?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me just jump on the chat here. So yeah, it was good. Everyone's highlighting. I know, and I want to bring Damien back in as well for the general Q&A as well. So one, jumping back here to Milani, you were asking about how collaborative systems will work within fashion retail.
So shall I try and answer the question?
Yes, please, mate. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, there are a few fashion brands that are using recommender systems quite a lot. One of them is Zalando in Germany, and another one is List. And there are people in these companies that are driving the REC-CIS research forward quite a bit. So we do hear about these companies quite a lot. So the recommender systems that they use make use of collaborative filtering, so the sort of the general technique that I presented before, and they also make use of other techniques. One of them is called product embedding. So the product embedding technique essentially tries to analyze all the purchase behaviors as well as many other features all together in order to find a representation of the products. It's not really in the context of personalization, it's in the context of understanding what a product is based on how people interact with it. And from that, what you can infer is what are similar products, what products may replace each other, or what products may complement each other quite well. And in the fashion industry, it's been extensively used to see what clothes could be matching as well, and these kind of things. So there are quite a lot of stories about recommender systems in the fashion industry. Yes.
Thank you.
If anyone else, feel free to jump in. But I did have another question, Robin, this is probably more tailored towards you because it's easier from a machine standpoint. But obviously, at the moment, especially this year, has highlighted the rapid changes that we see in you know, consumer behaviours and their mentalities and so forth. So obviously that would in turn probably shift the narrative of the story.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, we're starting to see a lot of thought leadership and articles centered around how, for instance, the whole COVID pandemic has impacted women to a greater degree or a very different degree than it has impacted men. And that's cross-generational, given all the different responsibilities and stresses that females have, educating kids, doing the shopping, managing the home, trying to do a job. You know, just to be able to have all of those perspectives to begin to say, what's on this customer's radar? You know, how are these circumstances beginning to influence their decision-making process? What's important to them? Having this sense of empathy as to how to make their day better, easier, more convenient, less stressful. So again, choosing the character, imagining the setting, what the conflict is, and then being able to imagine how you can solve those problems for that customer.
That's spot on. I can see here a question. I'm not sure if you see it as well from Noel. Can you see that, Robin?
I'm not see.
Okay.
I could have to stop my screen share.
That's right, no problem. So Noel was saying that when it comes to storytelling, do you see a difference in the generations? For example, Gen Z seeks out information in different ways than previous generations.
I think the reason why, I'm old school about storytelling. Storytelling has been in existence since the beginning of the time, since we first sat around a campfire and told stories. The stories, the methodology of telling the stories may have changed, but we are storytellers. People have always been storytellers, and I think that we are likely to always be storytellers. That's how we connect and understand the world. So whether we're Gen Z or we're a boomer, or we're part of the silent generation, those stories are, they're the connecting fiber. And we might tell them differently, but that's why I suggested that you can have the same situation and swap out the character. You'll create a different conflict. And then you could begin to understand how one product can be utilized, or how you can speak to multiple audiences by just elaborating or shifting the story slightly. Someone was developing an MRI, for example, and one of the things they recognized is that children are petrified of going into an MRI. So you have this exact same technology. The MRI is going to do the exact same thing, whether you're doing it an adult or an athlete. But when you come and you swap in and you say, this is a child, you recognize that there's fear, there's confusion, that, there's just all of these very negative emotions. So what they did is they redesigned the MRI to look like a spaceship, and they made it be about a story, and they made it be about an adventure to try and remove the fear. Same product, different audience, different scenario, gives you the opportunity to innovate a product and create a multiple usage for a different audience. So in answer to the question about Gen Z, their situation, their story, their conflict is different than perhaps a boomer or even a Gen Xer, but you could take the same product and be able to see it through the lens of that audience and that environment that they're in, and therefore be able to tailor that message and communication so that it's relevant and authentic to that audience.
That's excellent insight. Maybe one or two last before we go, because I know we're butting up against the top of the hour here. But with specifically around kind of where we are at the moment, you'd mentioned a lot about the need for observation in order to build empathy of the current environment. Obviously, in this kind of situation, and being as everything's shifted, is that how do we do that? Because it's very difficult to observe people if they're all sitting at home, and maybe that's where we have to lean more on the data that companies like Damien can produce from machine learning and things like that. No, anyone? No.
Was that for Damien?
No. Well, more for you, Robin. Is about, because you were talking about the need for observations in order to build the empathy for your customer, but like in the current environment where it's not easy necessarily to go out and see people in that environment, what do we fall back on? Is it falling back on like Damien's technology?
That's one of the things that I miss most. As a commuter, I spent a good deal of my time on Metro North and then on the subway. And I always used to say, you didn't want to be the person sitting next to me on the train because I was going to be like watching you, or I would ask you questions. But the other thing about observation is we are all consumers. If you start to observe, and that's where that default comes in, is we do things automatically. But if we begin to think about how these things are impacting us, it's a great lens, because a lot of innovation begins at home with problems that we need to solve for ourselves. The problem is that we don't look at ourselves closely enough. We don't consider ourselves consumers. We view ourselves as marketers or experts or whatever our job role or title is. But first and foremost, we're people, and we do things every single day. We do things that are both challenging, that we find simple workarounds, and the tension points. I use the battery example. Once you start to think about yourself and how you behave and things that you do and things that frustrate you, one of the things that drives me crazy as a writer is I love to handwrite in addition to using my computer. Pens are constantly leaky. Now, if I were in a different position, I might try and solve how to prevent leaky pens. There are things that happen in the course of our day. Think about EXO home kitchen kitchen tools. They were created by a guy who was watching his wife, who had arthritis in her hand, struggle to open a jar or struggle to use a knife. Ideas and behaviors are all around us. We just have to look at them, and they're right in our homes, and they're right in our own experiences.
Perfect. And then, well, like I say, we're running out of Damien. I think we'll jump on this one for the last one. David was asking if you feel there's going to be any pushback from consumers in general as data analysis gets more acute, and as in the kind of social dilemma documentary that we saw on Netflix.
So I think it really depends on the applications. The social dilemma obviously is very focused on social media, and it's a very different thing from retail and merchandising. So I think in general it could be that personalization is put some people off, but in my experience, I think it's a concern that I think people have too much when they develop these applications. I think there is always, once you are able to make predictions, once you are able to understand what a customer will be or won't be interested in, and then there are thousands of ways in which you can integrate these recommendations in their journey to be less intrusive, to be less pushy, and that's the kind of things that you need to think about, really. You also need to give your customers the choice to opt out from profiling, that's one thing. And also, even without opting out from profiling itself, you can opt out from some type of recommendations, right? But I think it's often a concern that people put forward at the beginning of a project, and I think it's very often way too soon. And what you need to do is try to develop those capabilities, try to see how you perform and what you can actually do, because there are different types of recommendations that you can do, and maybe some will be easier than others. And then you ask the question, how can I integrate that within the customer journey in the most efficient, less intrusive, nicest manner? And if you can't find one way, then you can just drop it and do something else, obviously. And that's also, and also one thing that you obviously need to do is constant testing and getting your customer feedback. A/B testing is one thing, but also simply getting some customer feedback to make decisions on whether you should keep or not a specific personalization functionality. But that's a bit of an answer. That's a bit, retail biased. Obviously, there are other concerns that are more ethical when it comes to social media, when it comes to news outlet as well. And in this context, obviously, you need to approach this from a much more ethical angle, not only from an efficiency angle. But we could talk about this for hours, so I'll leave that on the side for today, I think.
Perfect. Guys, I realise everyone's having to jump off because of these pesky 2 o'clock meetings that, or 10 o'clock in your particular case.
I'm happy to answer any additional questions. my email was in the screen share before. Again, you know, if to continue the conversation, I could talk about this ad nauseum. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. Robin, Damien, thank you again so much for doing that. I'll share all of this information out to everyone on the call, so everyone has that and can follow up accordingly. You know, fantastic. You know, excellent insights, and you know, just justified by the fact we were overran. So I think that's a good proof positive there. So again, thanks everyone, and hopefully catch you next month for the next one of these. And in the meantime, Robin, Damien, thank you so much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.